Our next talk is lightning talk about the 6 characters that could bring down your app. And this talk is from Moncef Belyamani. Am I correct? I'm so sorry if I say your names wrongly. I'm truly trying. Please help me. And Moncef writes coding guides for beginners and beyond. His very first tutorial for setting up a Ruby web development environment on a Mac has helped tens of thousands of people since 2012. The process is now automated by his popular script. Moncef has extensive experience across both government and private sectors and helped shape best practices on various engineering teams. His specialties include speeding up test suites and other repetitive tasks, improving code quality, and teaching people how to set up and use their Mac more efficiently. This is for me, so. This is a true story about how using the wrong method caused the app to hang for our users and how it increased our database CPU usage by up to 10 times. You probably are using the same method in your app right now. Find out what you should use instead. Let's go.
Hi everyone, my name is Moncef Belyamani. You might know me from my popular tutorials and scripts for setting up a Ruby development environment on a Mac, which you can find on my website. Or maybe you know me as Moncef, which was originally my DJ name, but now I use it everywhere online. Or maybe this is the first time you're hearing my name. Either way, welcome. This lightning talk is based on a blog post of mine that was featured in Ruby Weekly earlier this year, and a lot of people told me it was very helpful, so hopefully you'll learn something new today as well. And this story is about a common method and expression that ended up bringing down a Rails app I was working on. And you probably have it in your app right now. Well, let me give you a quick background on this app. I work for Truss, a small consultancy and one of the best companies I've ever worked for. We solve problems for both government and private sector clients, and we work on impactful projects that help improve people's lives. I was hired at Truss for my Rails expertise, and I joined a project called Caseflow for the Department of Veterans Affairs, the VA for short. This was a collaboration between the U.S. Digital Service, NAVA, TISTA, and Truss. Now in the U.S., there are hundreds of thousands of veterans suffering from health conditions, and they depend on financial assistance from the VA. They can submit claims to receive benefits, but the problem is it can take years to process the claims. To address this problem, this group of wonderful folks modernized legacy systems from the 80s and using human-centered design, built open-source Rails apps that make it easier and faster to track and process the claims. And one of those apps was for the Caseflow project, and the app was already 3 years old at the time I joined. Now this story begins on a winter day a few years ago, and I was working by my cozy fireplace when I get a phone call from the engineering lead. He tells me there's a recurring exception in Sentry that was affecting pretty much every user. At the same time, our Datadog dashboard showed the Postgres CPU usage was a lot higher than normal. Based on the Sentry logs, the team lead thought this exception was caused by a recent deploy since it seemed to happen all of a sudden. But he couldn't find anything in the most recent commits. So he asked me to look into it. Now, as someone new to this project, I had the fresh eyes benefit. As a side note, the photo with a person screaming into the phone was for comedic effect. In reality, this was a calm conversation over Slack. And going back to the problem, the first thing I did was look at the exception in Sentry, and I found the problematic line of code, which had been introduced about a year earlier. And I immediately knew what the problem was when I saw the infamous 6 characters. Can you spot them? Yes, .count. Now in Rails, calling .count on an active record relation translates to a count query in Postgres, which is slow and gets slower the bigger the table. I confirmed this by noticing statement timeouts for those count queries in New Relic, and this was with a statement timeout set to 30 seconds. I also double-checked by looking at the ID of the last record in the table, and it was over 34 million. In this case, the query included a .where and a .where.not, so it wasn't trying to count the entire table, but I presumed that even the filtered list was so big that Postgres couldn't count it all in 30 seconds. Now, looking at the code more closely, we can see that the only reason the previous documents were being counted was to see if there was at least one of them being returned by the query. We were not at all interested in the actual number of documents that matched the first query, just whether or not the result was empty. Now, there are more efficient and more idiomatic ways to check if a query returned any results. The problem is there are several of them, such as any, exists, and present, but they don't behave the same way. On top of that, the behavior depends on the Rails version. It's hard to remember which one to use in which situation, and there aren't any automated tools that I know of to guide us. Luckily, Nate Berkopec wrote a detailed article explaining it all. Now here's a screenshot from his article. Now, since we were using Rails 5.2, the best solution was to replace .count is greater than 0 with .any. Now, as soon as this change was deployed, the CPU utilization was reduced by about 5 to 10 times. Ta-da! Now, once this production issue was resolved, I found other instances of .count is greater than 0 that could be replaced with .any, and I fixed those as well. Another nice moment was when Nate found my PR and highlighted it in his Slack. And one question that came up was, why did the timeouts happen all of a sudden on that particular day? My best guess was that the documents table was slowly growing over time and finally reached the size at which Postgres could no longer make the count query within 30 seconds. Perhaps a larger than unusual amount of documents were created on that day. Unfortunately, the table didn't have any timestamps, so we couldn't easily tell how many documents were created at any given time. So what have we learned today? Well, here are actions you can take today to stand out and improve your project. You can check your app for .count is greater than 0, or .count.positive, or just .count, and replace them with one of the faster methods. You can add timestamps to any tables that don't have them, even if you think you'll never need them. You can add monitoring to track and measure things that matter. And you can use a lower value for global database statement timeouts, and maybe set a different value on a case-by-case basis, such as for long-running migrations. Well, there you have it. Thank you for your time. Again, my name is Moncef Belyamani. You can find me at Monfresh everywhere. And for more details and links that I referred to in this talk, as well as the PRs I submitted, check out my blog post at tinyurl.com/.count. Enjoy the rest of the conference.